Hey Amud Aleph. We'll begin Dalet Amud Bey, 6 lines from the bottom, the 2 dots. Amr v'Elazar ba'avina godol mashen emer b'Michol. The nevuah that's mentioned by Michol is greater. Yoser mimashen emer b'Gavriel is greater than it was mentioned by Gavriel Malach. Di'ila b'Michol ksiv v'alayach min asrofim. It says that one of the srofim flew to me with one swoop. It's one lashon of vayoyev. Ve'ilu gabe Gavriel ksiv vayish Gavriel asher yisi b'chazoin b'tchila mua bayev. So it's a double lashon. So it's with 2 flights. By Michal it's with 1 flight, and here it's by Gavriel it's with 2 flights. So it's greater than it was able to be done in 1 swoop, and then it's greater than it was mentioned if it has to be done in 2. My mashma the hayechan Michal who. So the pasuk that it says that echa min esraf, that it's Michal. How do we know that that's a reference to Michal? Amar Rav Yochanan also echad echad. We have a gzera shava echad echad. Ksiv hacha vayoyev alai echad min hasrafim. Over here it says one of the sraf. It says echad. It says the lashon vel. Ksiv hasam v'nei Michal echad hasorim harishonim bo lazreini. So it says the word echad. The echad is a reference to Michal. And as the Marshab speaks out, Michal is chesed. So it's done directly, without interruption. But Gavriel is a malach of din. So a malach of din, it pauses, it interrupts the flight. It doesn't come directly, in order to give a chance to be chayzer b'tshuva. Tana Michal ba'achas, with 1 swoop. Gavriel b'shtayim, Eliyahu ba'arbo, malach hamavis b'shmeina. It pauses more delays. However, Rahman Islam, the time of Mageifa, ba'achas, it comes directly. Omar of Yeshua ben Levi, afal pisha koron krishma basic knesset. Even though a person recited Krishma and Shul by Mariv, mitzvah lekreis al mitos, it's still a mitzvah to say Krishma al mita. Amar of Yosi Mikro, where do we see this in the pasuk? The pasuk says, Rigzu va'al techato imru bilvavchem al mishchavchem v'doimusela. So it says, Imru bil milvavchem, al mishkav, that which is mentioned, al mishkavchem, sheshach b'cha. And then v'daimu selam, and then be silent, go to sleep. So, al mishkavchem, b'shach b'cha, kriyashma, and then sleep. Amar Rav Nachman, im talmid chacham ein tzarf. If it's a talmid chacham, a person's a talmid chacham, he's constantly learning Torah, Torah is always on his lips, then he doesn't have to recite kriyashma al amita. And as Meforsh speak out, it's talking about a Talmud Chacham that existed in those days. We don't have this level, this darg of a Talmud Chacham today. However, he said if it's that level of a Talmud Chacham, it's not required. Amar Abaye said, nevertheless, af Talmud Chacham, even a Talmud Chacham, 1 pasuk of Rachmim, he's still required to say, Kigain. For example, what's an example of this pasuk of Rachmim? I place myself in your hands, I entrust myself to your hands, Hashem, and for your safekeeping. Amar V'leimi bar Chama, Amar Shimon ben Lakish la'olam yargiz adam yetzer toiv al yetzer har. So we brought this pasuk of Krish Malamita Rigzaval Tachto, so he darshan it in a different context, that a person should make a milchama, he should do battle. His Yetzer Toiv, he should agitate it against his Yetzer Har. Shenema Rigzu, if you do a milchama, if it's Rigzu, va'al techto, and then you don't come to a chet. Im natzcha mutav, if he's victorious, fine. V'im lav, but if he's not able to just have the Yetzer Toiv overpower the Yetzer Har on its own, he needs some assistance. In lav yasik b'Torah, then he should be Isaac in Torah. Shenemro imu bilvavchem, imru bilvavchem. So you learn Torah. V'im natzcha mutav, if his, of course he has to learn Torah regardless. But if this additional effort to learn Torah enables him to overcome his Yetzer Hara, fine. But im lav, if not, yikar krishma, he should recite krishma. Shenemro al mishkavchem. V'im natzcha mutav. And if he's victorious, it's fine. He should keep in mind, he should remember the Yom Misa. that everything in this world, he may have temptations, the Yetzer Hara is trying to incite him, but everything in this Olam Haza, in this world, is temporary, and he should remind himself of Yomi Masechet, Shenemar v'doimu sela, to be silent, the ultimate silence is Yomi Masechet. V'amar Levi bar Chamar Shem ben Lakish. Another memra that's mentioned, so it's different context, but it's another memra that was mentioned by these Mairoim. What is it mentioned in the Pasuk? The Pasuk says by Nasinas HaTorah that Rabbeinu Shalom gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu to give to Klal Yisrael, and it specifies different, seemingly different components. So what are these different levels, the different components of the Torah that was given? Luchais, when it says Luchais Ela Seres Adibris, that's a reference to the Seres Adibris. Torah Zimikra, that's Torah Shabbat, that's Mikra. V'hamitzah Zu Mishnah, that's a reference to Mishnah. Asher Kalsafte Elo Neviim Uksuvim. So Mikra refers to the Chumash. Asher Kalsafte is Neviim Uksuvim. To teach them to be able to paskin. You can't paskin only from Torah Shabbat. You can't paskin only from Mishnah. In order to come to L'dei Halacha, you have to have the Tamei HaMitzvahs and the reasoning on the basis of it. Zu Gemara. Melamed, this pasuk teaches you Shukulam Nidnu L'Moshe Misinai. All the components of Torah, Torah Shabbat, Torah Shabbat Peh, it's all given to Moshe Rabbeinu from Sinai. This is all Torah Misinai. Coming back to Krishna Alamita, Amar of Yitzchak Kolakar Krishna Alamita. If someone recites Krishna Alamita, it's like he's holding a double-edged sword. Sleep time, night time is a time of sakana, a time of mazikin. If he recites Krishna Alamita, it's like he has a double-edged sword to protect against the mazikin. So it has a double lashon. It doesn't say P, it says PVIs. It's a double lashon. PVIs biyadim, a double-edged sword. How do we know we're talking about Krishna? My mashma. Amar Marzruta Vitem Ravashi Miresha Dinyana. We can learn it out from the beginning of the pasuk. So it says they'll rejoice on their mishkavaisim, on their beds at the time of going to sleep. And afterward it says so that teaches you that at the time of their mishkavam, when they go to bed, they're holding a double-edged sword if they recite Krishna Alamita. If someone recites Krishna Alamita, the Mazikim, they depart, they leave him alone. So, Uf is a reference to Torah. So it's a reference to Torah. With the blink of an eye, it's forgotten. The Torah has to be on your mind constantly. Talmud has to be constantly in your mind. So the B'nai Reshev who are Mazikin, they will fly away, they'll depart, on account of the other Torah. So the Pasuk says Mzei Rav, which is hunger, and after it says Ketav Meriri. Meriri is the shade, the afternoon shade. So it says next to that L'chumei Reshev means therefore it's also a reference to shade. Amar of Shem ben Lakish, he darshans this pasuk in a slightly different manner. He says, Kol ha'isik b'Torah, he was Isaac b'Torah, Yisurin b'Telam Ameno. Not Mazikin, but Yisurin. That suffering will depart. He won't have the Yisurin. Shenemar v'nei reshav yabiu vein of Elator, like we said. Shenemar asoi v'nei v'einen vein reshav. Now here he departs slightly. Before we darshan that reshav means mazikin, here he darshans ein reshav ela yisurin. It's a reference to suffering. Shenemar mezei rav u'l'chumei reshav. So here he makes the connection not with the chumei reshav and ketam meriri, which is a shame, but rather the first part of the pasuk, that u'l'chumei reshav mezei rav, hunger, starvation, which are yisurin. So therefore he interprets l'chumei reshav as a reference to Yisurin, and with these Yisurin, Yagbi'uv. If he learns Torah, he'll be protected from these Yisurin. This, that if he's Isaac B'Torah, he'll be protected and saved from Yisurin. That's the Davar Pasha. What are you teaching me over here? Oh, this, Afilu Tinaika shall base Rabban Yomi Masechet. Even the children of Cheder know this. This is the Davar Pasha. Shenemar Bayem Rim Shamo Tishim Lakol Hashem Lakecha Vayasha Beinav Tasa La'azantal Mitzvaysa V'Shamarta Kol Chukam. It's enough in a pasuk. It's a double pasuk. Every child knows that if you listen to the mitzvahs, that Hashem will protect you. He won't bring the Yisur and the machlas of Mitzrayim, and He is our healer. Ella, what's the drosha? What's the chiddush? Ella kol she'ef sheloi lasik b'toyer ve'enois. Avad, if he's Isaac B'Torah, will protect him. But here it's teaching you something else. If he's not Isaac B'Torah, if he could be Isaac, and he's not Isaac B'Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe he'll have Yisur Macharam v'Oichan Isa. It brings on terrible Yisurim that afflict him. If he doesn't, if he could learn Torah and he doesn't, Shenema Ne'alam Te'dumeach Shesim Mitay, Rochevi Ne'ekar, and he has these Ne'ekar, Che'evi, these sufferings, which are Ne'ekar, which are terrible sufferings, and he's because he was Dumia Hechsheis Mitayv. The ain't Tayv, and he was silent from Tayv. And what is Tayv? Ain't Tayv elu Tayr. Shenemar ki lekach Tayv nasati lachem Tayras yal ta'zayvu. So if he's silent from the Torah when he could be, then he has the Yisurim that are Mukhwarim v'oichan oisi. Amr v'zeir v'teimer v'chanin bar papa borei shaloi ki midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu midas basar v'adam. Look how different the midah, the attributes of Hashem, how different it is than humans. Midas basar v'adam adam meicher chevetz l'chaveroi. If a person, because he's forced, because of financial difficulties, if he has to sell a precious item, then meicher atziv l'keach sameach. The seller is sad, the purchaser is happy. The seller is sad that he's forced to give up this precious item. The buyer is happy; he's now in possession of this item. Hashem's not like that. He gave us the most precious in the world. He gave us the Torah, and he's happy about it. I gave you this precious Torah. Don't leave it. Hold on to it. So He wants us to keep it. He wants us to have it. So different than a seller a human who reluctantly sells the item and departs with it. He'd much rather have it for himself. And the question arises, what do you mean Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah? Does that mean that He doesn't have the Torah? Hashem has everything. He gave us the Torah to learn, but it's the Torah of Hashem. It's not like a seller who sells a precious item and now he doesn't have it anymore. Perhaps the pshat is that in a certain manner it now belongs to Basar V'Dam. How is that? Because now the Psak Halacha, the Torah, is given to us, and the Psak Halacha, if Bezdin of Sanhedrin comes to a Maskon al-Halacha through the Yud Gimel Midos, that's binding, that's Kaveya. Nitzchuni Bonai. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, if the Torah is given to us, if we follow the Messiah, we learn the Torah, and we go with the Yud Gimel Midos, and there's a Sanhedrin and they paskin, that's Psak Halacha, that's binding. So we're talking, we darshan this pasuk Gabi Yisurim. We darshan this pasuk of Gabi Yisurim. Now we're discussing a little bit about Yisurim. So if a person, Rahman al-Islam, sees that suffering is coming upon him, he should have introspection, examine his deeds to see what is the reason that he's having these Yisurim. We have to be chayker v'nashuva ad Hashem. Also, so he examined and he couldn't find a particular reason, a particular chet, why this oinus should come upon him. He should be Taila, he should attribute it to his bittul Torah. Shenemar asher gever asher teresenako amitaroscha talamden. So asher gever asher teresenako umitaroscha talamden. It's because he's not learning the Torah, and if he learns the Torah, then he won't have those Yisurim. The question arises, if Bittul Torah is one of the greatest affairs, one of the most terrible averas. So what do you mean he was pishbesh v'loy matzah? He examined his deeds, he couldn't find anything, so he's told with bittul Torah. Shouldn't be that the first thing that he has to examine to see if he has the avera of bittul Torah? Chaim Volozhiner explains that when we say he should examine his meisim to see what he can attribute these yisurin to. The midah of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is midah keneged midah. So if a person did an avera with a particular limb, particular aver, he did something with his hands, with his fingers, he did an avera. He did an avera with his eyes, with his mouth. The oynesh, the punishment, the yisurin, will be corresponding to that aver. If he did something with his mouth, it will be a punishment with his lips, and with his eyes, with his eyes. So if he had a particular punishment on a particular part of his body, and now he cannot find an avera that corresponds to that aver, to that limb, to attribute this punishment, these yisurin, to that avera, then yitl b'bittul Torah, because bittul Torah encompasses the whole person, and the yisurin can be affected by any part of the body. As opposed to other averas, if he did an avera with his hand, for instance, the punishment will be midah keneged midah with his hand. But anything that he did in particular avera with his hand, yitl b'bittul Torah, because that can affect any part of the body. And if he now examined that and he couldn't see any particular avera, and he couldn't be toil on bittul Torah, he was learning as much as always, or more than always, and he couldn't be toil on bittul Torah, then the yadush yisurim shel ava. Then he knows that there's something called yisurim shel ava, punishment that comes not as a result of a particular avera. Normally, punishment comes to be mechaper for an avera, to achieve atonement, forgiveness for an avera. But there's a concept of yisurim shel ava, where a person didn't do a particular avera, he didn't do anything wrong, but Hashem brings suffering in order to give him a greater schos, a greater reward in olam haba. He didn't do anything wrong, and it's not coming for a kapara. It's coming to be able to bestow upon him a greater level of reward in olam haba. The one that Hashem loves, He'll rebuke. What does that mean? He loves him so much that he wants him to be able to have greater reward. And through these yisurim, the person, through withstanding these yisurim, will become a greater person and have a greater reward in olam haba. The one that Hashem loves, he afflicts him with yisurim. The one that Hashem has love, he afflicts with sickness. You might think even if the person doesn't accept it willingly. So it compares it to an asham, a korban. A korban has to be brought willingly. These yisurim shalahava have to be accepted willingly. If a person does accept it, what's his reward? He'll have offspring and children, a long life. He won't forget his learning. His learning will be now in his hand. He'll have it retained. He'll have it tzlacha. How can we determine if something is yisurin shel ahava? Kol shein ben bittul Torah. If, in spite of the yisurin, it does not require him to stop his learning, even though he has his suffering, but it doesn't cause him to have bittul Torah. Shenema asher gever asher te'aser nekah mitoroscha talamdenu. Then, in spite of the yisurin, mitoroscha talamdenu, he's still able to learn the Torah. That's one opinion of how do we know if it's yisurin shel ahava. Another one says, what is yisurin shel ahava? Kol shein bittul tefillah. If it doesn't involve bittul tefillah, he's still able to continue with his davening in spite of the yisurin. Shenemar baruch halakim asher lehisir tefillosi v'chazda mi'iti. So his lo hisir tefillosi, The tefillah was not removed. He was still able to continue his davening. And he says, no, different opinion. He says, whether there's bittul Torah, bittul tefillah, it still could be Yisurin Shalav. The one that Hashem, after the pasuk mentioned by the Torah and the tefillah, these psukim that we just brought down, but it still says, after that, it says, in spite of that, the one that Hashem loves, he'll rebuke. So it could involve bittul tefillah and bittul Torah. Not that he's still able to learn, but talamdenu, teach us, meaning we learn out from the Torah this concept of Yisurin and the ramification of it. We learn out a kal v'chaim r'sher and ayin on the impact of Yisurin. A master who owns an Eved Kanani, if he knocks out one of his limbs or one of his organs, this slave goes free. Yisurin shememar called gufa shaladim, Yisurin which cause the whole body to suffer. Al achas kama v'kama. So certainly that sets the person free, it cleanses him, and elevates him, and gives him greater reward. It says the bris by salt, the nemer bris be Yisurin by suffering. Nemer bris b'melech chasiv lois hashris melech bris. So by the korbanos we have to bring the salt, and that's considered a bris, a covenant between us and Hashem. V'nemer bris be Yisurin chasiv elo divra bris. It says elo divra bris. It says by Yisurin, by the after the klolos that were mentioned in Mishnah Torah. The clothes, which is Yisurin. Ma bris hamur b'melech melech b'matekes as a balsar. To salt the meat, it draws out the blood. It makes the meat edible. It sweetens the meat to eat. Af bris hamur b'Yisurin. Yisurin memarkin kol avenos shel adam. So the Yisurin also, it's a bris. It's memarkim. It cleanses the person. It elevates him and gives him, enables him to have greater reward.